Hello, world. Welcome to Discover Your Talent, Do What You Love, number 142. I'm creator and host Don Hutcheson. Every day I interview someone from around the world who has discovered his talents to do work he loves, to create a life of success, satisfaction, and freedom. Today I'm delighted to bring you our featured guest, Dr. George Moricz. Welcome, George.
Well, the pleasure is mine, Don. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. George, are you using your talents doing work that you love?
Almost every day that I can imagine.
All right. We want to hear the whole story. Dr. George Moricz has produced small miracles for countless clients who travel both near and far to East Texas. In particular, his VIP clients travel from all over the U.S. and even overseas for his therapies. Dr. Moricz has taken on the medical establishment with his proprietary youthful blueprint system. His mission is to give smart and successful people their very own ticket to youthful sexuality. As a thought leader in anti-aging, Dr. Moricz has integrated hormonal balancing, weight management, and control over fatigue. He has advanced cutting-edge anti-aging philosophies with the release of his book, Body Hormones Balance Revolution, a game-changing concept in taking years off people's age. George, that's a pithy summary of your innovative life to date. So tell us what you're up to now that has you engaged and fired up, if you will.
Well, one of my latest projects for clients that I haven't even met around the country, they, for one reason or other, because of the waiting list that I have in my wellness business, they either can't get to where I am, and they asked me. I said, well, would I release some of these secrets of helping people with their sexuality, with their relationships and productivity. And so I started to put together some of the protocols, some of the secrets that my clients enjoy every day. Mm-hmm. But understand, Don, it wasn't that easy. In other words, there was a point not too long ago, well, because of personal adversity, things I couldn't fix as a medical doctor that I wasn't too optimistic about. But saving myself from disability allowed me to figure out certain principles that I never learned in school, nor do I know that most doctors ever learn. And so what I've done lately for women over 40, smart and savvy, aging before their years, I put together these secrets so that they can get a glimpse, a sneak preview of how they too could be living a big life.
Okay, that's interesting and really fascinating. What a huge market, huh?
Well, I get a lot of interest from people that I've never met. I have doctors that I help. And so I think there's an ever-increasing awareness of people wanting to live a bigger life.
Yes, exactly. Well, as you know, everyone's life is composed of turning points. We go through actually 7 or 8 times during our lives. We face challenges and choices and changes and make decisions that propel us on into the next transition or turning point. Take us back in your story as far back as you'd like to go and tell our listeners about your biography, if you will. Where did it all begin? What happened early on?
Well, it's funny as you go through your middle years in life, certain things start to crystallize. And if you had asked me in my earlier doctor training as a surgeon, what were the reasons for doing what I do, I probably could have given a very vanilla answer. But as you go through life, you face certain challenges, you help people, you start to appreciate how similar we are as people. I think in medicine, what happens is oftentimes we believe because we have this additional knowledge, training, and dedication that somehow we might even be a little immune to the same things that hurt other people's health. Mm-hmm. So a few years ago, when I was suffering from disabling exhaustion and fatigue, I couldn't sleep, I had to look back to why I went into medicine. And one of the critical, there were 2 critical points, I think, in my formative years when I was very impressionable that ultimately led to the choices that I make today.
Okay.
There was a doctor from the Midwest, and he was kind of a Norman Rockwell type doctor, if you can imagine it. You're in his office. His wife was his secretary nurse. It was a house that was probably converted into an office, and he saw all his clients. He was much older, and he was just the kind of the doctor that you always wanted. And so as a child with my sister, who was a year younger, we would go to the doctor. Well, what I'm about to tell you will just crack you up as to how impressionable a young child was. So we would go in there with sickness, cold. I don't know if it was really serious. And for the longest time, I thought that I got better because he talked with us. I didn't know that the prescription bottle of whatever it was, antibiotics and whatever you got at the pharmacy had anything to do with getting better. I mean, I certainly was aware that my mother was giving me another pill or a syrup that had medicinal value. But for the longest time, I actually believed it was the power of the relationship or whatever he said and did.
That's beautiful.
And similarly, I kept looking back at why would a doctor who got very sick, and why would he exit a traditional surgical practice? Admittedly, I never really believed in a lot of prescription writing, just like Dr. Jenkinson, the doctor who took care of me when I was younger. I wasn't really sure that, going from a big bottle at the pharmacy to a little bottle and handing it to a person was the way to go. So I chose a surgical training because I knew I could get gratification fixing things, removing things, and people seemed to get better for the ailment. Right. The reality was that a year later, they were still suffering from the same age-related problems. Okay. So what took me and allowed me to separate from the traditional practice? Well, subconsciously, just like Dr. Jenkinson had an influence on what I saw a doctor should be, my father was a structural civil engineer. He used to design superhighways. And so going through my teen years, I was not in a doctor's family, and so I used to do blueprints for my father. I used to draft blueprints, and the money was very good, and the experience was very interesting. And so by doing that, I used to see things built, blueprinted, and if something ever went wrong years later, we went back to the blueprint. So look at your house. If you built a new house and a few years later, you go back to the blueprint. It makes sense, doesn't it?
Sure it does.
Yeah. So what I did 20 years as a doctor, and having looked at everything, I said, well, wouldn't it be really neat if we could go back to your youthful blueprint? In other words, the thing that made you right, and get people better again. And it was only because of my father's exposure and training in engineering principles that I saw things very differently. And so as soon as I cracked this youthful blueprint code for myself to save me and help everybody around me, that's when I started helping people. So my father's influence as an engineer showed me things that I might never have looked at had I just stayed in the traditional dogma and the kind of the box of doctor training.
I think it's fascinating that you saw early on that the medicinal route, the big pharma route, was not as helpful as it's touted to be, and I think it's equally fascinating and makes sense since your father had that structural genetic code that you got that too, and you thought that, and I think rightly so, that surgery would be a place where knew you could fix the mechanics. If you couldn't fix the source of the problem, some of the illnesses, but you could fix the mechanics of somebody's body through surgery. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, as I say, I look back and, you mentioned different changes in people's lives. And I guess, I had a client recently come see me. She's a very nice VIP client. I've helped her with a lot of things. And, she said to me in kind of an interesting way, she says, Dr. Moricz, she goes, I'm glad you suffered through all that disabling, exhaustion and so forth, because you saved me a lot of pain and suffering in life. And I know she meant it well, but right. The truth is sometimes we don't know until we look in retrospect what that path not traveled by or the path that you did take. And so I credit a lot of incremental innovation, of looking at things differently through difficult times.
Yes.
A lot of times we would love to tell ourselves it's because we figured it out right away. That's why we're doing so well. But quite humbly, it's been quite the opposite.
Yes. When did you start suffering from the exhaustion, the disabling exhaustion and fatigue?
Well, it started slowly, but I noticed through my 30s. So in my surgical training, I trained as an OBGYN as a solo doctor. I told you that I really admired Dr. Jenkinson. Well, I wanted my own practice too. And so I saw all the ladies in my practice, every visit, did all their surgeries. I stayed on call. So everybody who came that I could accept as a new patient was someone I would follow through the pregnancy. And I did a lot of high-risk pregnancy, a lot of complicated things. I would actually deliver and make sure they got well. Well, as much as I loved it, as much as I loved the experience of birth and helping these people, it took a real toll on my body. So as I was going through my 30s, I was getting really run down, devastating sleep disruption and so forth. And literally, I counted 6 years of just not sleeping. And so I had to give up the thing that I loved the most. And, it was very, very difficult.
What modalities did you use, particularly being a doctor, to treat the problem that's not sleeping?
Well, interestingly, see, I assumed that because I was working in this realm of a surgical specialty in the care of women and their wellness, I assumed that every other specialty, sleep, hormones, whatever the other fields were, that they would take care of the problem equally. And that's where it was this huge eye-opener. In other words, I started to see things the same way that people who came to me saw them. In other words, I thought if you come to me, I do my part, you get better. Okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a little optimistic, maybe naive. But what I realized when I was the doctor who had to become a patient, I realized that they really didn't have very much that helped me. I'm not saying they didn't help people. I'm just saying is that it didn't help me. You feel like you're one of those old pinball machines when you get bounced around. So sure. I was going to different doctors. I could get access to people that most people would never believe. I had access to any medicine, and none of it seemed to help. So it was very embarrassing that here I was, went through all this training as a doctor, dedicated myself, and happy to do it. It was the same thing that disappointed me when I needed help. So I went through the usual channels. And it was only when I started looking outside the box, talk with researchers, that I was able to crack the code. I actually developed a natural, based on your brain chemical sleep system. In other words, I had to develop a system that would help my sleep chemicals sleep well at night. And it was not one of those black box medications you see on TV or the newspapers, but it was based on the system, and it's an actual system. Well, at the time, it was just done to save me, and then I turned around and I started helping people with it. So, what we have today is Dr. Moritz's ultimate sleep solution. But that was through the agony of sleep exhaustion. So I started looking at more natural methods. I started studying the patterns of lack of sleep, what it did on your immune system, what it did with your weight. And from that started to emerge all these problems that people weren't getting taken care of.
Wow, amazing. This sounds like an incredibly intricate biological, chemical issue that is there a sort of an executive summary version of how your invention works that's not too technical for our listeners?
Here's the embarrassingly humble admission.
Okay.
It took me forever to figure this out. And what I'm about to share with you is the three principles. And if your listeners are out there or have a pen and paper, it would be worth writing down. I mean, if they were to do anything and they forgot any of the personal things that I've undergone, if they wrote these three principles down, they would understand more than most people who have gone to many doctors, gone on the internet, gone to all kinds of complementary approaches. So
perfect. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. So here are the three accepted facts. Number one, youth is perfect health. In other words, when you're young, it doesn't matter if you sleep right, eat right, you wake up the next day, you have tons of energy, and you certainly don't have any sexual trouble. Okay. So, we understand that. I think you agree. So right. Youth is perfect health. Accepted fact number one. Accepted fact number two, when you had youth, you had perhaps the most perfect combination of natural chemicals and hormones through your body. Okay. So in other words, you had this youthful blueprint and it was effortless. You didn't have to think about it. I mean, look, when you're 20, Don, right? Do you ever believe that you're ever going to be unyoung again?
No, of course not.
No. I mean, you're invincible. So accepted fact number two is that you have this perfect combination of hormones and chemicals with you. Accepted fact number three is when I rewind you back to this youthful blueprint, that perfect natural combination, what happens is you start enjoying the things you once enjoyed about being young again.
Okay.
And it took me forever to figure this out. It was the influence of somebody like Dr. Jenkinson in my mind that says, what would he do if he got into a bind? Well, you would go back and become a medical student again and rediscover the things that work. And so I had to come up with principles that were not the things in my training. And then secondly, as my dad taught me a lot about blueprints, I started to imagine. The most unique or different approach that I have is that not having ever met you at 20, and you're 10, 20, 30 years out, people come to me and I'm able to figure out their blueprint.
Okay.
If you're 20, it would be impossible to drag you in my office, draw blood, ask you all these invasive questions. You don't need me. But if we met you at 20, Don, I would do that for you. And I'd say, look, Don, things are going great at 20. I'm going to take this, put it in a time capsule. Let's go outside and bury it. Okay. And so we do that. We bury it in the ground. And then 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, when you're not doing well, you come back, we go outside, dig it up and say, here's your blueprint. But the big breakthrough was that I can figure this out without ever having met you at 20.
Oh, my gosh. Well, the whole thing, besides the aging process and not having the perfect balance of chemicals and hormones in your body, the deleterious dimensions of all the chemicals and pesticides and pollutants that are in everything from our hand soap to the foods that we eat in GMOs, that's got to just exacerbate this problem to an epic degree, huh?
I agreeably, yes. So in other words, I'm even seeing young people in their late 20s, early 30s. See, for a long time, we would sort of ignore this aging process that occurs between 30 and 50. Now I'm seeing very young people. I mean, I have clients who will bring in their full-grown children, adults, and I'm helping them as well. So I think you've nailed a very critical point, is that here we have these genes, your DNA, and we now have things that are good for it, what we call nutrigenomics. In other words, food, like a light switch, turning on certain things that tell your genes what to do. But in the field of epigenetics, just a fancy way of saying is that there are things that are modifying the genes. So exactly the things you're talking about. There's the things you don't see, and then there's the things that are packaged, processed, genetically modified, and they're triggering it. And while it's a little bit outside the scope of our show today, is that there are different disease processes and so forth. But ultimately, the one tool that I have is that even if I can't identify the exact offending agent, if I rewind the blueprint, often that alone will help build up your immune system. So in other words, when you give people back their youthful blueprint, especially the hormonal component, it works on your immune system. So hormones actually modify your immune system. That's why when you're 20 and you break your arm, you recover very quickly. If you do it when you're 60, not so good. Yes,
exactly. Let's go back to the thesis or the topic of the show, which is most people aren't in their sweet spots. 86% of the people around the world, when asked if they enjoy what they do every day, say no. 70-some-odd% in this country say that, according to Gallup's 25-year ongoing study. What's that about? Why do some people, like you, have followed their, and I'm not saying it's been easy. You went 6 years without sleep, for the love of might. I can't even imagine how terrible that was. We all have battles and issues, but you kept moving forward. You kept plowing ahead. You kept coming up with ideas and trusting your instincts. Why do people get stuck, and why can't they move beyond that?
You know, they often share in retrospect, after I've gotten them better, we go through three phases. One, we get rid of bad symptoms. Next, we give them positive outcomes. But ultimately, we're having them write their very own successful transformation. In other words, when I see people, it doesn't matter what age they are. Maybe they're far out from their blueprint. But as I'm talking with them, I am already visualizing what they were when they were youthful. Okay. And when I was in training, we saw people who were really, their health was beaten down. They were really not doing well, and they were in a bad place. And so we were band-aiding things because we were not taught to envision somebody well.
Yes.
And so the one advantage that I think I had through all this adversity, some very bad years, I believe that it was my place to figure this out. In other words, that, we're all chosen for a certain purpose. And while it didn't make a lot of sense when you're going through it, I felt that I was supposed to go through this so that I could help other people find their successful transformation. In other words, try to rev up their metabolism, supercharge their relationships, increase their productivity so that they too could write the movie in their own life. And how does this become practical? Well, when I see new clients, and some of them travel very far away, I live in East Texas. It's not easy to get to. And a number of people will do unbelievable things geographically to get here. And one of the first questions I will ask them is, why would you go through these steps? And evidently some of the principles that I'm sharing with you now and all the listeners out there is that they too will have a different approach to it. But the one question I asked them is, how will you know whether what we're working on will be successful for you? And that's when people start thinking, hey, you know what? I'd like to improve this in my life, the person in their life. I'd like to help them in some form of productivity. It's their movie. They're writing their own success story. And interestingly, when I walk down my hallway, it's very inelegantly done, but we have plastered in our office these exact success stories.
Oh.
Now, I would give anything, when they first came in as to how undeveloped their success story is, but I believe subconsciously people really have a secret desire of what they want out of life.
Absolutely.
Sure, something keeps you up at night. Something is very, very painful. And so I have learned, through the humility of working with people and their trust, is that it's very important to figure out what would be their success story now, even if they're not there. Because in some way, I too, as a doctor, maybe even though I was helping people, I think I didn't really believe I was giving them a successful transformation. Oh. You see what I'm saying? I was doing surgery. I was sort of band-aiding them so they go to the regular doctor, and a year later, they're suffering from metabolic issues, hormonal issues. They can't think clearly. They don't make as much money. I mean, it comes down to that sometimes. They're not living it. And so I think that my internal frustration kind of fueled me looking at that. And so maybe that gave me the advantage. But now I think the most empowering thing for the right person who's just enough open-mindedness, a little bit of healthy skepticism, is to start visualizing what is it that they really want for their success story. And yes. I think as I'm doing all these therapy, because they trust me, they understand how I'm doing this and my dedication for it, but they need to allow themselves to write their own success story. They're sort of the Picasso, and they're just, or a Steven Spielberg's, and they got the camera, and they're writing their own movie. Yes. And if you allow them to do it. But I would also wager that if they are told they're sick, they are told that they never had their youthful blueprint, that they were never well, then I believe that you can make people not get better. In other words, you can talk them out of permitting yourself to undergo this transformation.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And I think the systems, the structure of our society, whether it's family or religions or organizations or educational system or universities, they're just systems. They have their own agenda. They're doing the best they can, but they're not our agendas. Their agendas are not our agendas. And I think that that's where people run amok. They just can't see themselves outside to write their own success story. So what have been the most palpable aspects of your life that have been impacted by you writing your own success story?
Well, I think my role is different now, and I always felt from an early age that there was a real power in helping people heal, and now my goal now is to expand access to people who can't necessarily come to see me. In other words, my mission is to give people a bigger life, and so through releasing some of my principles, philosophies, I want to empower people. One system I mentioned earlier is my sleep system. Right now, we have 70 million sleep sufferers. This was the very thing that almost disabled me, okay? And what I realized that no one had taken a comprehensive look at the fact that 90% of sleep sufferers, they have the same 6 brain chemicals that are deficient or imbalanced. In other words, if you're not a real sleep sufferer, you can go to the store and find something over the counter on Amazon. If that gets you better, well, that's not really what I'm talking about. Right. And then there's the other people who will try all these short-term black box sleep aids, prescription-based, and cause all kinds of goofiness and addiction and so forth. And so I think that helping people with their sleep, getting them deep sleep so they rest through the night and wake up refreshed, that's probably the biggest component. And so to answer your question, I'm trying to do things outside of my physical ability to see people. In other words, spread the word, give them access to these things. In other words, maybe they can get a little bit of the VIP experience without ever having to really physically come to where I am or meet with me. And that's what I'm trying to work on now, is to help people that I really can't physically see.
Exactly. 70 million sleep sufferers out of, what do we have, 300 million people?
That's right.
What is it around the world with 7 billion people? How many? Well, probably in a lot of the countries that don't have as much pollution in their foods and in their environments as we do, the sleep deprivation is probably not as bad, huh?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the United States, we have better and better studies on the numbers. I'm just wondering, especially in third world nations where there are so many other issues that are complicating people's health, do they even really look at it as an issue? I don't know. But I would wager that, certainly even thinking outside the boundaries of the United States, we could be helping them.
Yes. Well, yeah, in those countries, they might not be eating polluted foods and GMOs and pesticides, but they may be in environments where there's huge social and political turmoil, which would totally disrupt their sleep and make sleep a major issue for them, to say the least. Okay, so you've chiseled out your own life, to say the least, and you're living a very fruitful life and you're growing and learning. What would you say to people out there, whatever age they are, heading off to college or thinking about pre-retirement or making their first career transition? What would you say to them about how to do what you've done, how to envision their own life?
One thing that can help people, especially in their earlier years, is to always look at a higher level of why we do things. In other words, certainly there's activity and there's achievement. But I think it's important for people to sit in some solitude and, to shut off their phones and so forth and think, how do I want to impact the world? How at some point later in my years do I want to leave the world? What do I want to be known for? And what that will often cause is some frustration because you will realize, well, there's all these things I'd have to do such and such. But the sooner that one defines it, the better. Now, for some people who hadn't defined it early in their life, there's going to be a point of adversity. There's going to be something they didn't count on, something that wasn't expected. It's not all going to be red carpet. And at those times, those are defining moments. And for those people, I would also say the person has to sit down and figure out what is the principle, what is the thing that will leave the biggest impact around the world around them. Because, we're not islands and we do impact different people. So for people suffering through adversity, the hardest thing to do is to tell them, look, it's going to get better. Because sometimes it doesn't get better right away. But if they look inside themselves and ask them, how can I get out of this? How can I make this work so that I can do one thing correctly? One final point is that I've had people go through some very difficult times. And interestingly, they had just gotten enrolled in my program. And most of them said at the end of it, this is what they taught me, Don, is that, you know what, Dr. Moricz, things were going very badly, life, work, health, and so forth. And what I was asking them to do without maybe really knowing is that you've got to work on one positive thing. Yes. And for them, it was this program. And so as people run through adversity, maybe one thing is that they've got to pick an area where they can succeed and have small definable goals. So when the other problem works out, which it often does, they can look back and say, you know what, I did something positive.
Have there been any seminal books or resources as you've chiseled out your career that worked for you or that inspired you?
Well, I know in the medical realm, there are some researchers who are tirelessly working, and I've had the privilege to bump into and talk to people working on different areas. I can't give you one sort of called Bible of fitness because there are people in different arenas who are really helping people. What I have learned through and discovered through this process is that just like I'm helping people in a certain way, there are some other very dedicated people who do something better in something that I don't do. So I think as a person goes through this process of trying to slow down aging and transform their lives, I think it's important for them to be looking for things that help with the mental, physical, and spiritual side. I don't know that, even if I gave them back their blueprint, if they didn't fix the mindset issues, if they didn't find something spiritual about it, they might leave with a void. And so I believe, even if I don't know it, I have a feeling that everything I'm doing is helping them succeed with the other, but they also need to develop the other because they need to develop a reward other than just the fact that they're going to feel and look better in their life.
Yes. I think you're exactly right. The mindset is everything. So this amazing internet thing, what resources do you like and use as you are growing your vision for your practice? And all the things you're inventing?
Well, with the upcoming release of the Amazon book, The Hot and Sexy Hormone Solution, what we're doing is we're linking through ebook, the secret principles that I've used for my VIP clients. And with it, of course, we're also sharing some of my live events, things that are both instructional, they're fun, and they show people who may not have seen of how this works. And so we're trying to link both in text and into some video format as well. And then what we're trying to do is create an arena for people who are excited enough to want to take advantage of some of these principles and figure out a way where they can get some of what I already do here for people.
Okay. Perfect. So what do you see? I think you've been pretty clear on where you are moving forward, but what's a 30-second summary of your vision over the next handful of years? Just a pithy summation of where you're headed.
Well, I think that the smart and savvy people are going to seek out solutions regardless. This has been shown through the ages historically. There's always a certain group of people to do it. What I would like to do is have more people who would want to invest in themselves participate. In other words, it shouldn't be so hard to get to. And then, of course, develop the expectations, because it is very confusing out there. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of things that people can access, trying to develop a balanced approach so that people get what they want. In other words, manage expectations.
What are you proudest of in your life to date?
Well, I don't know if it's the easiest question, and it's probably an evolution. There are days when, I walk down the hallway, and I alluded to this a little earlier. Years ago, when I was helping a lot of people surgically, I was helping a lot of women and so forth, people would often say thank you. And I know they really meant it. Now, it doesn't matter what the day is like. I walk down the hall and I will read these true success stories written from the heart. And it is like nothing else that I could have imagined. I mean, I surely didn't envision myself entirely as a 6-year-old in Dr. Jenkinson's office with a cold and walking and someday, having people write these unbelievable transformations in their life, things that save the relationships at home, things that allowed them to do so much better than they ever had, and do it in a very short amount of time. And so while I admit that I was always a visionary of sorts, I had a view that didn't always agree with what other doctors and people had seen. I always saw things a little differently. I didn't know the impact that it would have at this point in my life to have people share these success stories and truly live something that they never thought was attainable.
Dr. George Moricz, what a great pleasure being with you today. We appreciate you sharing the highlights of your amazing life story, and I know that listeners around the world have learned many lessons on many levels of their life that will benefit their journey going forward. So how do listeners get in touch with you?
Well, so here's what we're working on as we're finishing up this book, this project, is that it's called the Hot and Sexy Hormone Solution. And what I've done is I've included some free gifts. In other words, some free evaluations, things that are not only fun, but also very instructive that can help people. So what I would do is have them get on Amazon and look for the Hot and Sexy Hormone Solution. Okay. Take advantage of some free things I have in there, things that people are already experiencing in my VIP business. And that will give them a next level of participation, and hopefully we can give them their big life.
Oh, perfect. Well, as listeners know, you can go to discovertalentpodcast.com. The summary of this fine interview will be reprised, and so will these links. So you don't have to pull the car over and write this down on the side of the road. You can just go to our website. Thank you, listeners around the world, for joining us today. If you head to our website, you can see an infographic based on an ebook you've heard me talk about for a long time. What do highly successful people actually do to succeed? 12 proven career-building strategies to help you do what you love. Dr. Moricz has illuminated and exemplified many of those strategies today in our interview, and I think you'll find it a good kickstart for wherever you are in your life. You can also subscribe for free on iTunes and Stitcher. We would love for you to. We're building our tribe and would like for you to be a part of it so we can provide useful people and content to serve you better. In closing, every one of us is born with unique talents and gifts. We don't learn them. We cannot ignore them. They're just a part of who we are, our DNA. Whenever we discover them and use them in our lives and careers, we do not merely survive, we thrive in every way possible. So until next time, all my best in whatever you do. Have fun out there today.